Shalom Havarim, James Trim here, and I want to share with you some very important things about the restoration that is taking place in these very days and where we are in biblical prophecy. As you probably know, I recently produced a video for you. If you haven't watched it, you should watch it. You should share it with everyone that you can share it with that might be interested. It's titled The Restoration of Nazarene Judaism. It's very, very, very important information. It is fully documented. It's got the PDF handouts, and it's got documentation of everything that it presents. And the important information that it presents is that the original followers of Yeshua were not Christians. People talk about getting back to the New Testament church, but there's two things the New Testament church didn't have. They didn't have a New Testament, and they didn't have a church. The original followers of Yeshua were a sect of Judaism known as the Nazarenes, and they were not Christians. They were Torah observant believers in Yeshua as the Messiah, because Yeshua did not come to create a new religion, i.e. Christianity. He came to be the Messiah of the old one, Judaism. And so Yeshua came to be the Jewish Messiah of Judaism. If he had wanted a people that were not Torah observant, if you read Jeremiah chapter 11, you can see that he already had that people in our forefathers, and that wasn't clearly what he wanted. It becomes very clear in the book of Jeremiah, among others, that Elohim absolutely had no need for a non-Torah observant group of people, as more or less he already had that. Now, you may have noticed that there's a great deal of trouble brewing in the world today. I don't think any of us would have predicted 2 years ago the level of anger and hatred and political division that has struck the nation, and even this nation, the United States, and even the world, as we have people worldwide that read these blogs and watch these videos. And meet. We have congregations that are meeting in Brazil and Australia and Belgium, etc. So the level of political division and of hatred of brother against brother has risen to levels that really none of us would have predicted 2 years ago. This is itself the fulfillment of prophecy. As we read in Isaiah chapter 66, verses 7 through 9, before she travailed, she brought forth. Before her pain comes, she was delivered of a man-child. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Is a land born in one day? Is a nation brought forth at once? For soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. Shall I bring to the birth and not cause to bring forth, says Yahweh? Shall I that cause to bring forth shut the womb, says your Elohim? These times that we're living in are times of pain, of travail, and don't worry, because that is necessary for the birth and restoration of the house of Judah. And we're going to find out that the true representative of the house of Judah is Nazarene Judaism. That's a group that has two qualities. They believe Yeshua is the Jewish Messiah of Judaism, and I say they, we, are Torah observant. This Isaiah 66, 7 through 9 is referenced in Revelation chapter 12, verse 2, and she was with child and crying and laboring in childbirth, also being in pain to bring forth. And another sign was seen in heaven, and behold, there was a great dragon of fire, um, who had 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns before its head. And its tail drew away a third part of the stars, and there were in heaven, and cast them upon the earth. And the dragon was standing before the woman who was about to give birth, so that so that when she gave birth, he could devour her child. And she gave birth to a male child who was about to rule the nations with a rod of iron. And her son was caught up to Elohim and to his throne. And the woman fled to the wilderness, where there was a place that was prepared by Elohim, that he should nourish her for 1,260 days. And there was war in heaven, and Michael and his angels were fighting with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. And they did not prevail, and no place was found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that head serpent who is called Akelkartzar, the devil, and Hasatan, who deceived the whole world. He was cast out upon the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And in the interest of time, we will scoot to the last verse, 18. I'm sorry, that's chapter, verse 17. And the dragon was angry concerning the woman, and he went to wage war with the remnant of her seed, those who keep the commandments of Elohim and have the testimony of Yeshua. Those are the two qualities of the ancient sect of the Nazarenes and the two qualities of the modern restoration of Nazarene Judaism. Now, there's always been Nazarene Jews. There's always been Jews who secretly or otherwise believed Yeshua was the Messiah while maintaining Torah observance and being Torah observant. But now there's a modern restoration taking place that's frankly very exciting. And if you watched my video, the restoration of Nazarene Judaism, also did another video very recently on the restoration of Nazarene Halakha, which is one of the elements absolutely necessary to restoring this ancient sect of the Nazarenes. So part of the restoration of the ancient sect of the Nazarenes isn't just going to be restoration of Nazarene halachot, which is plural for halakha. That's very exciting, but that's just one element of restoration. There are other really important elements, and they are in prophecy, and I want to show this to you today. The scripture restoration is one of the most important and key elements of the restoration, and the restoration of the house of Judah. So Yahweh is getting ready to do this great restoration. In fact, it's happening right now. The ground has been softened. There's a lot of broken, easy for planting. There's a lot of things that have happened, a lot of teachings and movements that have prepared the way. And I don't want to go into the history of some of those modern movements that have softened the ground, but these things have happened, and here we are in this wonderful time. But the time's come for us to get more serious about restoration of the house of Judah. And by the house of Judah, I mean Nazarene Judaism, which is the authentic representation of the house of Judah today. The original Jewish followers of Yeshua. Now, some of you may know I've been engaged in this restoration for most of my adult life. In fact, I'll even say all of my adult life. Someday in the future, I will give a video testimony of how I came to be a believer in Yeshua as the Messiah. Some of you are aware of that story, and how I became called to restore this ancient sect of Nazarene Judaism. Um, Suffice it to say that I've been doing this since the 1980s, and but the time has come for some really strong foundational work as we are really coming into the climax. Um, and unfortunately, we have neglected the Word. We've neglected the Tanakh. We've been given the last days, this last days gift of restoration of much of the Hebrew and the Aramaic of the so-called New Testament, but we've neglected that gift as well. And we've had many books restored to us in the Apocrypha, and especially the Book of Enoch, which I've been doing a line-by-line study on, and we have neglected those as well. We've neglected the words of Enoch the prophet. First Enoch chapter 104, verses 10 through 13. But when they write down truthfully all my words in their languages, and do not change or diminish aught from my words, but write them all down truthfully. That's something that we've been doing as we have been going back to the oldest, best in Hebrew and Aramaic manuscripts and restoring this work of restoring the original Hebrew and Aramaic and translating the Hebrew and Aramaic into English. That is key to something that I've been engaged in for a year now called the Scripture Restoration Project. And it's very, very important and a very, very key part of the restoration that is taking place. So back to back to First Enoch chapter 104, verses 10 through 13. He says, repeating what I said before, but when they write down truthfully all my words in their languages, and do not change or diminish aught from my words, but write them all down truthfully, all that I have testified concerning them, then I know another mystery, that books will be given to the righteous and the wise, to become a cause of joy and uprightness and much wisdom. And to them shall be the books be given, and they shall believe in them and rejoice over them, and then shall all the righteous who have learnt therefore all the things of righteousness be recompensed. Enoch was speaking of this generation. And I've been given several projects that will put more of the word of Yahweh into the hands of the people. And you may be aware of some of those. The time has come near in which the prophecy of Isaiah 29, verse 18 will be fulfilled. The deaf shall hear the words of the book, and the eyes of the blind shall see out of obscurity and out of darkness. In order to understand these things, it's very important to understand the olive tree prophecy of Romans chapter 11, the olive tree allegory and prophecy of Romans chapter 11. And to understand that, it's important to understand that it ties in with the book of Ezekiel and the two sticks prophecy of Ezekiel chapter 37. In Ezekiel chapter 37, two sticks are joined together, Ephraim and Judah, to become one. These two sticks become one. The word stick in Hebrew in Ezekiel 37 is etz. Etz also means tree. So there is a direct parallel in the Hebrew between these two sticks, one of the house of Israel and one of the house of Judah, if you will, that become one. And these two trees olive trees, of which branches one are grafted into the other. Uh, uh, and so this is a very important prophecy to understand in understanding the reunion of the two houses of Israel in Ezekiel 37. Um, Also, it's important to understand uh, uh, the olive tree prophecy of Romans 9 in context. And so that we can understand it in context, we have to look at something else first. It's helpful to look at the first at the book of Hosea. And in Hosea chapter 2, verses 24 through 35, and it's verses 22 through 23 in Christian versions, we read, "And the earth shall respond to the grain, and the wine, and the oil, and they shall respond to Israel. And I will, Israel, and I will sow her unto me in the land, and I will have compassion upon her that had not obtained compassion. And I will say to them that were not my people, you are my people, and they shall say, you are my Elohim." It's very important to understand this. Previously in the book of Hosea, he has told the house of Israel, you are lo ami, not my people. And here he speaks of a time when he will say to those to whom he said lo ami, you are my people. That's Hosea 1:4, in fact. Yahweh said unto him, call his name Yisrael, for a little while I will visit the blood of Israel upon the house of Yahu, and will cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. And then verse 7, I will have compassion upon the house of Israel, on the house of Yehuda, the house of Judah, and I will save them by Yahweh their Elohim, and I will not save them by bow, nor by sword, nor by battle, nor by horses, nor by horsemen. So Yahweh's telling us that there's a time when the number of descendants of Israel is, quote, as the sands of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered, in Hosea 2:1 or 1:10 in Christian versions. That group known as Lo Ami, not my people, are the ones that become the sons of the living El. Okay, it's all very important to understand these first two chapters, really, or these opening verses of the book of Hosea. All right. So the house of Israel. Well, let's move on. So this takes place when they are lo ami, which means literally lo means not, ami means my people. When Elohim says to this group, the house of Israel, to whom he said lo ami, you are my people, you are ami, coincides with this restoration of the house of Israel as opposed to the house of Judah. We read a very interesting prophecy in the book of Baruch in the Apocrypha, chapter 2, verses 30 through 35, which really describes this restoration well of the house of Israel. But in the land of their captivities, they shall remember themselves. They've lost their identity. Lo ami, they're not my people. And in fact, there are a number of places in the Tanakh where the house of Israel are referred to as Gentiles or Goyim because they've lost their identity. In Isaiah chapter 9, the opening verses, the land of Galilee is called the land of Naphtali, and the land, two of the tribes of the house of Israel. The point being but it's called Galilee of the Goyim, Galilee of the Gentiles. This is just one example of a place where the house of Israel are referred to as Goyim. So anyway, it says, they shall remember themselves and shall know that I am Yahweh their Elohim. For I will give them a heart and ears to hear, and they shall praise me in the land of their captivity, and think upon my name, and return from their stiff neck and from their wicked deeds. for they shall remember the way of their fathers, which sinned before Yahweh. And I will bring them again the land which I promised with an oath unto their fathers, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and they shall be masters of it. And I will increase them, and they shall not be diminished, and I will make an everlasting covenant with them to be their Elohim, and they shall be my people, and I will no more drive my people. This is, they shall be my people, and shall no more drive my people of Israel out of the land that I have given them. This, by the way, happens in the call to come out from Babylon. In the book of Revelation, when he says, come out of her, my people. Okay, Romans chapter 9. Let's look at the olive tree prophecy, the olive tree allegory. Romans chapter 9. Now, it's in chapter 11, but we got to start in chapter 9 because we got to put this together and get the context with the book of Hosea. Okay, so we've got to read chapter 11 in context of chapter 9. Romans chapter 9, verses 23 through 27 says, and poured forth his mercy upon the vessels of mercy that were prepared to Elohim to glory, which we are the called, not only from the Jews, but also from the Goyim. Thus also he said to Hosea, I will call those who were not my people, and to them whom I have not shown mercy, I have not shown mercy, I will show mercy. For it will be that in the place where they were called not my people, that's Lo Ami, there they will be called sons of the living Elohim. Hosea 2:1 or 1:10 in the Christian versions, and Hosea 2:25, which is verse 23 in the Christian versions. Verse 27 of Romans 9, and Yeshayahu proclaimed concerning the Bnei Yisrael, the sons of Israel, that even through the number of the sons of Israel should be like the sands that is in the sea, a remnant of them would be saved. So, what's important to get from this context is that you have two groups here. You have the children of Israel, which shall be, and you have the children of Judah. If we look at the context of the people which were not my people, which he calls my people in Hosea, looking in Hosea chapter 2, verse 1, chapter 1, verse 10 in Christian versions, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered, and it shall come to pass that instead of that which was said to them, you are not my people, it shall be said unto them, you are the children of the living El. This is speaking of the house of Israel, the Ephraimites. Then, the next verse, verse 2, chapter 2, verse 2 in Jewish versions, chapter 1, verse 11 in Christian versions. And the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and they shall appoint themselves one head, and shall go up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Israel. So, if Paul is quoting Hosea in context and contrasting the Jews with the Gentiles, using Hosea chapter 2, verses 1 through 2, or chapter 1, verses 10 through 11 in Christian versions, then the Jews of Romans 9:24 are the children of Judah of Hosea chapter 2, verse 2, or chapter 1, verse 11 in Christian versions. And the Gentiles of Romans 9:24 are the children of Israel of Hosea chapter 2, verse 1, or 1:10 in Christian versions. Can you see that? This is very, very, very key and very, very, very important to understanding Romans 9 through 11, and particularly when we get to Romans chapter 11. Paul's Jews in this section are the children of Judah, but his Gentiles are the children of Israel. As I said, there are a number of places where the children of Israel are referred to as Gentiles in the Tanakh. For example, as I said, in the opening portions of Isaiah chapter 9. Um, and of course, this is why I said the olive tree parable parallels the two sticks of Ezekiel 37, the two houses of Israel. All right, now moving on to Romans chapter 11, verse 16. And if the first part is set apart, the lump of the dough is also, and if the root is set apart, the branches are also. And if some branches were broken off, and you who are a wild olive tree were grafted into their place and became partakers of the root and of the olive tree, do not boast against the natural branches. But if you boast, you are not bearing the root, but the root bears you. And perhaps you should say of the branches that were broken off, I will be grafted into their place. These matters are Yahweh, they're beautiful. They were broken off because they did not have trust or faith, emunah, but in Hebrew. But you stand by trust, by emunah, by faith. Do not be exalted in your mind, but fear. For if Elohim did not spare the natural branches, perhaps he will not spare you. If you look in Jeremiah 11, you'll see that he didn't spare the natural branches because they weren't Torah observant. Verse 22, see then the gentleness and the harshness of Elohim upon those who fell, harshness upon you Gentiles, if you remain in the gentleness, and if not, you shall also be broken off. And those, if they do not remain in their lack of trust, also will be grafted in, for Elohim is able to graft them in again. And if you who are from the olive tree that was wild by nature, which is obviously Ephraim or the house of Israel, were cut off and were grafted contrary to your nature into the good olive tree, the house of Judah, how much more then shall if they be grafted into their natural olive tree? And verse 25, for I want you to know this mystery, my brothers, so that you will not be wise in the thought of your nephesh, or of your soul, of yourself, that blindness of the heart in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Goyim should come. That's actually a reference to the fullness of the Goyim. The phrase is synonymous in Hebrew and in Aramaic with the phrase multitude of nations that we see in, I believe it's in Genesis 37. So which is another place where the house of Israel or Ephraimites are called Gentiles. No, it's Genesis 48, verses 18 through 20. Let us, verse 26 again, I'm going to repeat Romans 9. And then all Israel will have life. Thus it is written, from Zion a deliverer will come and turn iniquity from Yaakov. And then they will have the covenant that is from me. Then I forgive their sins. Okay. The phrase fullness of the Goyim, as I said, is the same in Hebrew and Aramaic as multitude of nations. This is referencing Genesis chapter 48, verses 18 through 20. And Joseph said unto his father, not so, my father, for this is the firstborn, but put your right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and also shall become great. Howbeit his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations, or a fullness of Gentiles. Milah Hagoyim. And he blessed them that day, saying, by you shall Israel bless, saying, Elohim make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh, and set Ephraim before Manasseh. So this is referring to the house of Israel known as the Ephraimites. So Romans 11 speaks of the branches from the house of Israel being grafted into the house of Judah. The branches from Ephraim are directed to be fed by the root, and the tree which represents the house of Judah. It's important to note there's two trees, one representing the house of Judah, or the house, and one representing the house of Israel. There are two trees with two different roots. The branches of Ephraim are to be fed by the root of the house of Judah as opposed to the house of Israel. Romans 11 does discuss this stage of the restoration, but it also tells us an even more powerful stage that involves Judah being grafted back into its own olive tree. This is key. This is the focal, this prophecy is the focal point purpose of this ministry, of my life's work, frankly. Okay? What Paul is, well, Paul says in Romans 11:12, he says, and if their stumbling become riches for the world, and their loss riches to the goyim, how much more, therefore, their fullness? Verse 15, for if their reprobation was the reconciliation of the world, how much more, therefore, their return to life, but life that is from among the dead? And then verses 23 through 24, he says, and those, if they do not remain in their lack of faith or trust, also will be grafted in, for Elohim is able to graft them in again. This is talking about the house of Judah. For if you who are from the olive tree that was wild by your nature were cut off and were grafted, contrary to your own nature, into the good olive tree, how much more, therefore, those if they were grafted into their natural olive tree? Paul is here talking about something even bigger than the restoration of the house of Ephraim, bigger than the so-called two-house movement, the Ephraimite movement, and so on. Yes, that's prophecy to take place that has taken place, okay? But here, there's something that Paul basically says, you ain't seen nothing yet. Wait till you see this. And this is the restoration of the house of Judah. Romans chapter 11, verses 8 through 12. Thus it is written, Elohim gave them a blinding spirit and eyes that they might not examine, and ears that they might not hear until this very day, referring to Deuteronomy 29:4 and Isaiah 29:10, particularly Isaiah 29:10. Remember that, because Isaiah 29 is key to the restoration of Judah. Okay, and David again said, let their table be a snare before them, and their reward a stumbling block. Let their eyes be darkened, that they not see, and their back always be bowed. Now say, have they stumbled so as to fall? Absolutely not. But in their stumbling, life has come to the goyim for their jealousy. And if their stumbling became riches to the world, and their loss riches to the goyim, how much more, therefore, their fullness? Paul is recalling here the apostasy and restoration of the house of Judah as prophesied in Isaiah chapter 29, verses 9 through 10. Remember when Paul was teaching the Bereans in Acts chapter 17? It says that the Bereans didn't believe a thing that he was saying, or they didn't believe him, that they checked the scriptures to see if what he was said was true. And Paul said, what are you looking in, what scriptures did they have? The only scriptures they had was the Tanakh. And Paul said that they were more faithful than anybody else that he had been teaching, because he didn't say, what are you looking there for? You're looking at old wineskins for new wine? Wait till I write the book of Ephesians. You'll find it in there. Wait till I write the book of Romans. No, Paul said, great, glad you're looking in the Tanakh to see if what I said is true. And if we actually look at what Paul's teaching in context of the Tanakh, we will understand it much, much better. And in Romans chapter 11, verse 8, where he says, Elohim gave them a blinding spirit and eyes that they might not examine and ears that they might not hear until this very day, he is referencing Isaiah chapter 29, verses 9 through 10, where we read, "Stupefy yourselves and be stupid, blind yourselves and be blind. You are drunken, but not with wine, that stagger, but not with strong drink. For Yahweh has poured out upon you the spirit of deep sleep, and has closed your eyes, the prophets, and your heads, the seers, he has covered." Isaiah chapter 29 is a very important prophecy of the apostasy and restoration of Judah. Verse 18, Isaiah 29 still gives the resolution of this apostasy. It says, "In that day shall the deaf hear the words of a book, and the eyes of the blind shall see out of obscurity and out of darkness." This is why I say we have neglected the word. We have neglected the Tanakh. We've also been given the last days gift of the restoration of the so-called New Testament in the original Hebrew and Aramaic, but we've largely neglected it. We've also had many books restored to us, the Apocrypha, the Book of Enoch, and we've neglected those as well. And most importantly, we are having restored to us, which I will discuss later in this teaching, the Gospel according to the Hebrews, which is the original Jewish gospel that was the source for the four Gospels that we have today, and which the church fathers regularly refer to as having been used by the ancient sect of the Nazarenes. This prophecy of Isaiah 29:18, "And in that day shall the deaf hear the words of a book, and the eyes of the blind shall see out of obscurity and out of darkness," is, I believe, referring to the same prophecy of Enoch, chapter 104, verses 10 through 13. "And when they write down truthfully all my words in their languages, and do not change or diminish aught from my words, but write them all down truthfully, all that I have testified concerning them, then I know another mystery, that books will be given to the righteous and the wise to become a cause of joy and uprightness and much wisdom. And to them shall the books be given, and they shall believe in them and rejoice over them, and shall all the righteous then shall all the righteous who have learnt, therefore, all the paths of uprightness be recompensed." 1 Enoch, chapter 104, verses 10 through 13. This is why I have begun the Scripture Restoration Project to restore the original Hebrew New Testament. And New Testament is not really the correct term. Let me explain real briefly why it's not the correct term, because New Testament just means New Covenant, and it's not the New Covenant. Okay? It's not. The New Covenant, that's a Christian term that was created to describe these books, and they are, and Brit Hadashah, those who simply modify that to Brit Hadashah to try and make it sound Jewish, because that's Hebrew, are still falling into the trap of identifying this book as the New Covenant, when in fact it is not. It's the Ketuvim Netzarim. It's the writings of the Nazarenes. The name New Covenant was created by Christians for this group of books to imply that the Tanakh is the Old Covenant and obsolete, and to tie into references to Old and New Covenant that appear in our scriptures, which in fact are not referring to these two collections of books. All right, what the New Covenant is a whole different teaching, but it's not this collection of books. Okay, we have a lot of work ahead of us. As I said, Enoch was speaking to this generation. There's a whole, in fact, I've been doing a line by line teaching through the book of Enoch. we finished, I think the last episode was 14 in the series, going through the book very carefully. And I've stopped for a few reasons, to let people catch up. We're in the astronomical section, and that you can look at the videos and see that people just need some time to catch up. And so we'll pick that back up after we've given people time to catch up in that series. So we haven't forgotten it, and we'll be picking it back up. Enoch's a very, very important book. Okay. I've been given a number of projects that I am working on, that I have been directed to do, and one of the most important of these is the Scripture Restoration Project. We have a handful of manuscripts of the original Hebrew. I won't say they're the original Hebrew. We have a handful of ancient manuscripts, ancient texts, in very old manuscripts of certain books of the so-called New Testament. Particularly, we have the book of Matthew complete in the Dutile Munster version and the Shem Tov version, which are different versions, but which are closely related to one another, that have come down to us, that are, I believe, I am convinced from my researches, are descendants within the Hebrew scribal tradition. They are not, on the whole, at their core, they are descendants of the original Hebrew scribal tradition of the book of Matthew. They are not translated from some other language into Hebrew, in my opinion. There may be some parts of them that have been corrupted by the scribes in copying over periods of time, but at their core, this still remains. We also have a Hebrew copy of Hebrews, the Paul's letter to the Hebrews, that was taken from among the Jews in the 16th century, and again, at its core, I believe, is the original Hebrew of the book. The text may not be perfect, it may be susceptible to scribal errors, but there are ways to discern these things through very careful textual criticism of all the available manuscripts and texts, etc. And fortunately, I have made a study of that, of textual criticism, and a study of these Hebrew and Aramaic New Testament sources for literally decades. We also have first part of the first chapter of Luke and part of the first chapter of Yochanan in Hebrew. We have a small fragment of Mark in Hebrew, and we have some other manuscripts that have come to light in Hebrew that will simply have to be carefully scrutinized to determine whether they are helpful in this process or not. In other words, whether they descend from the original Hebrew or they were translated from Greek, Latin, or other sources. We also have Aramaic manuscripts of the four Gospels called the Old Syriac. There's missing pages, but we have two different manuscripts of the Old Syriac Aramaic version of the four Gospels, comprising about 95% of the text surviving. We also have what's called the Peshitta Aramaic version of the New Testament, which is the standard Aramaic text that's been used by the Syrian Christians of the Syrian Orthodox Church, and the with a very slight variation between the two, also by it's called the Peshitta. It's also used by the Aramaic-speaking Syriac is a dialect of Aramaic-speaking Christians of the Church of the East, or the Holy Assyrian Apostolic Church of the East, to use the full name. It's also been used by the Chaldean Roman Catholics and so on. So we have these manuscripts from at least the 4th century in Aramaic coming down to us. We also have a lot of academic work that's been done by some really major scholars, some of which were dismissed over the last century. Charles Cutler Torrey, to name one of the major scholars, a professor at Yale, did a lot of work on Aramaic New Testament origins. For both the Gospels, parts of Acts, and Revelation. There's a lot of material and a lot of information that can be used to restore the original Hebrew text of the New Testament. And that's the project that I am working. That's a big part of the project called the Scripture Restoration Project. One of the nice tools that I'm able to use is then, since we have all of Matthew in Hebrew from authentic Hebrew sources, and then we have Mark and Luke in Aramaic, and we also have Matthew in Aramaic, I can compare all of those, and in the synoptic passages, you surely know that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels because they have a number of parallels. And so one of the processes I go through is using the Hebrew Matthew and then going over to Mark and Luke and using the what I can get from Hebrew Matthew that makes sense to put in the synoptic passages for Mark and Luke to recover the original Hebrew there. And then recovering the rest of the original Hebrew by back translating from Aramaic, because Aramaic and Hebrew are very similar languages. They use the same 22 letters. They use much of the same vocabulary, and much of this, at least with the consonants, they use the same 3-letter roots, for a lot of the same 3-letter roots, I'll say. The pronunciations are somewhat different. So in Hebrew, it's shalom. In Aramaic, it's shlama. In Hebrew, camel is gamel. In Aramaic, it's gamla, etc. Okay, so you can see how easy it is to translate shlama to shalom, to gamel, gamla to gamel, etc. And they have very similar grammar. So you can really see the Hebrew behind Aramaic more often than not. This is a project that Elohim has called me to that I have been working on for about a year now. Hasatan has thrown everything he can at me to keep me off that work. Going back to snowpocalypse in Texas, we were victims of snowpocalypse and actually had to flee the state temporarily to survive. That's a long story, but we've had a lot happen in our lives over the last several months to hinder that project. But like a dog with a bone, Elohim has called me to do this. I am doing it, and so that's not the most important part of this project, the Scripture Restoration Project. Restoring the original Hebrew behind the books of the New Testament is part of that project. The beautiful second additional part of that project is using that information, particularly in the 4 Gospels, to restore the original Hebrew Gospel according to the Hebrews, which is a lost gospel. We don't have any copies of it anymore. It's referenced by the Church Fathers, quoted about 50 times in the so-called Church Fathers. So we have about 50 quotations from it. And we also have information from the Church Fathers that effectively testifies to the fact that our Gospel of Matthew was an abridgment of the Gospel according to the Hebrews, and that Luke and Mark clearly used it as a source. And therefore, using that information, plus the quotations that we have, plus other information and logic that we have at our disposal, I'm convinced that I have the ability to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, if you will, to restore the original Hebrew text of the Gospel according to the Hebrews, which is very, very important to the restoration of the ancient sect of the Nazarenes, because That was our primary gospel in ancient times. The church fathers testify to that fact repeatedly. In fact, sometimes it was even called the Gospel of the Nazarenes. So this is very, very important work for the rest. Scripture restoration is key to the restoration of the ancient sect of the Nazarenes. Now I need to ask you to step up and support us in this work. As many of you may know, my wife is disabled. She is not only disabled, but she's chronically ill and suffers chronic pain. And I'm her caretaker at home. I normally work at a desk about 6 feet from her bed, where I'm readily available to help her throughout the day as her caretaker. She had serious problems from a 53-day hospital stay in 2018 that required me to leave my secular job and be here as her caretaker. And so I have done that. That said, we need your financial support, either as tzadikah, alms, because of the situation that we are in, or as tithes and offerings to support the work that I am doing, because I am having been put in this position by Elohim and given a lifetime of study in the necessary areas, and having been called by Elohim to do it, I am doing a great deal of work here at that desk 6 feet away from her to get this restoration of the original ancient sect of the Nazarenes and the restoration of the house of Judah restored, this ongoing work of restoration. Like Paul says, if you thought the two-house movement, if you thought the restoration of Ephraim was something special, you ain't seen nothing yet. How much more so will be the value of the restoration of the house of Judah and the restoration of the ancient sect of the Nazarenes. So you can donate by, I'll put a link at the bottom here where you can donate, but you can also donate by PayPal to donations@wnae.org. That's donations at W as in world, N as in Nazarene, A as in assembly, and E as in Elohim, wnae.org. Or you can click on the donations link at the in the video description. All right. I hope that this is helpful to all of you. Please continue to like our videos, visit our videos, share our videos, and this work of scripture restoration. You can also visit scripturerestoration.com, and I will put, scripturerestorationproject.com, and I will put a link to that at the bottom of this video as well. This work of scripture restoration is important, and you'll see more videos delving into deeper aspects of this work as time on the project goes on. But we do need your help with these projects. It is a joint effort between you and me, and these wonderful, wonderful things that are happening in this last day's restoration of Nazarene Judaism. Shalom, everybody.